Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Larry Parks Show. I'm Larry Parks, and this is the Extreme Consumer Advocacy Show. We talk about how ordinary people get ripped off by the system. And the system that we've been most concerned about is the monetary system, because it threatens not only your pension, your savings, your annuities, or anything that's been promised to you for future payment. And if you've been watching this show for a while, you know the malfeasance in the monetary system is off the scale, and people's pensions and savings and whatnot are being depreciated as I speak. Tonight, I'm going to do the second part of a three-part series on why the monetary system violates Jewish law. Now, let me just take a few moments to review Jewish law, the particular law that I'm concerned about, and it's called the Genivas Das commandment. Genivas is the verb form of the Hebrew word ganav, which is a thief. Genivas, to steal, and das is your mind, literally to steal your mind, but really to misrepresent. It's forbidden. So let me just run through a little bit about the Genivas Das commandment, and then I'll recap quickly what I covered in the first part, and then I'm going to talk today about misrepresentations, violations of Jewish law on the bills themselves. So let's go to the first slide, please. The Genivas Das commandment is a prohibition against deception. The literal meaning of Genivas Das in Hebrew is theft of one's mind, thoughts, wisdom, or knowledge. That is, fooling someone and thereby causing him or her to have a mistaken assumption, belief, and or impression. Thus, the term is used in Jewish law to indicate deception, cheating, creating a false impression, and acquiring undeserved goodwill. Let's go to the next slide, please. Genivas Das goes beyond lying. Any words or actions that cause others to form incorrect conclusions about one's motives might be a violation of this prohibition. One does not have the right to diminish the ability of another person, Jew or Gentile, to make a fair and honest evaluation, whether in business or interpersonal relations. And let's go to the next slide, please. This prescription of Genivas Das is included in the transgression, you shall not steal. It's really a subset of one of the 10 commandments, and Torah explicitly states that you should distance yourself from false matter. Come back to me, please. Now, this is a very serious commandment. It's not one of those things like keeping kosher where you can get forgiven and whatnot at Yom Kippur by throwing a rock on the stone and asking forgiveness. This is almost a capital offense. Now, let's go to the next slide, please. So the sages believed that there are 7 types of thieves, and the most egregious is the one who steals the minds of the people. In other words, misrepresenting to ordinary people. And finally, the next slide, please. Again, this is not a minor prohibition. One of the sages, one of the old Rebbe scholars, says that Absalom, the son of King David, deserved death for violating the Torah law against Genivas Das. These references come to me from Hershey Friedman, who's a professor of business and marketing department at economics at Brooklyn College, and he put this up on an essay in a terrific piece of research that he did. Come back to me, please. Now, what I did in the last session is I showed what the founders had said about paper money. And I had quotes from people like George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, James Madison, where they all were against and spoke very vehemently against paper money. And then I showed images of the money that we use today that has their pictures on the paper money, as if they would give their imprimatur to the paper money when in fact they opposed it. And in fact, at the Constitutional Convention, when it came up whether to allow the government to issue paper money, it was voted on and rejected. So that was the session of my first part of this violation of Jewish law. Today I'm going to talk about violations on the bills themselves. And as a segue, I want to just do a little bit more on what I did in the first time, and I want to talk a little bit about Salmon Chase. Salmon Chase was Lincoln's Treasury Secretary during the Civil War, and he issued legal tender notes to help finance the Civil War. Legal tender is something that Thomas Jefferson, you recall, said we didn't have. Thomas Paine said that people should be sentenced to death for proposing legal tender. Now let's go to the next slide, please. Now here is a quote from Salmon Chase when he was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he wrote this in the Knox versus Lee decision. And he says, the legal tender quality of money is valuable only for the purpose of dishonesty. Come back to me, please. So here you have the sitting Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court telling you that whenever you see legal tender on a bill, it's necessary only for the purpose of dishonesty. Let's go to the next slide, please. And here you see a Federal Reserve note. It's got Salmon Chase's picture on it, and this is a legal tender note. This is an image of a $10,000 bill. Now, in the left-hand side, you see that A, and there's some little writing above it. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is what that writing says. It says, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private, and is redeemable in lawful money at the United States Treasury at any Federal Reserve Bank. So here you have, come back to me. So here you have on the paper money a picture of the sitting Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who said the whole thing is necessary only for dishonesty, and here they have the effrontery to misrepresent to the people in violation of law, Jewish law that is, that Salmon Chase might have approved this when in fact he condemned it in no uncertain terms. And now we come to tonight's topic. I want to talk about misrepresentations on the bills themselves. Let's go to the next slide, please. We have in the United States this notion that we have what they call the rule of law. And the notion is in order to achieve more certainty in personal relationships, people enter agreements, contracts, which are governed in an area of law called contract law. The concept is that the courts will uphold legal contracts not fraudulently entered into by consenting adults. Go to the next slide, please. Actually, one slide after that. One more. There we go. A vital subset of contract law deals with promises to pay. In the most elemental form, promises to pay are called promissory notes, also known as notes. Now go to the next slide, please. Now, for a promissory note to be legally valid, it has to have 4 elements. Come back to me, please. These 4 elements used to be on the Federal Reserve notes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what the 4 elements are on the original Federal Reserve notes, and I'm going to show you how this stuff got taken off. So in effect, the misrepresentation is to call the money that we have now notes. They are not notes. Come back to that exact same slide. Do not go ahead that we were at. Okay? So for a promissory note to be legally valid, it has to have 4 elements. First, it has a maker, a person or an entity who's going to make the payment. Go to the next slide, please. And then it needs a payee, somebody who's going to receive the payment. Go to the next slide, please. And then it has to have an amount to be paid. And finally, go to the next slide, please, a date certain when the payment is due. Now go to the next slide, please. Now here's a $20 Federal Reserve note. And at the top, it says Federal Reserve note. You have to go 1 slide back. You went ahead too far. There we go. At the top, it says Federal Reserve note. The maker is the Federal Reserve. The 20, it's a $20 bill. So we have the maker, and we have the amount of the note. Go to the next slide, please. And at the bottom, I've blown it up so you can see what it says. It says we'll pay to the bearer on demand. The bearer is the payee, and on demand is the due date. So now we have the 4 elements that make this a legal promissory note. We have a maker, the Federal Reserve. We have the amount of the note, which is the $20. We have the payee, which is the bearer. And we have the time when it's due. And go to the next slide, please. And here is what these Federal Reserve notes look like today. And it no longer says we'll pay to the bearer on demand. That no longer appears on the bill. Come back to me, please. So, by calling the money that we have today notes, this is a misrepresentation. And really what they did is they snuck this in. This is not something that people voted on. People aren't even mindful of it. It looks like the old Federal Reserve notes. And the fact that the important wording, will pay to the bearer on demand, that's all missing. And the reasons it's missing is because they don't have anything to pay to the bearer on demand. And in effect, they have deceived people. This is a violation of the commandment Genevas das. In other words, it's a trick. Now go to the next slide, please. Let's see what Webster's Dictionary has to say about what constitutes fraud. And this is right out of the